So let me ask you this question as we're getting started on this message. What is a voice that has been in your life that when you hear it, it is like you're tuned into it? You with me? If you're in a crowded room and this person were to call your name, you're going to hear them above all the other noise in the room. Somebody's voice like that in your life, Hannah. Simeon, yes. And we all hear Simeon. Yes. Your wife. See, that's a good answer right there. Points. It's a points-based system, husbands. Best friend, yes. Drew. Your Aunt Betsy, come on. I think we can hear Aunt Betsy right now. We can imagine. Anybody else on this side? Your mother, yes. Still today. We never outgrow that, do we not? I know. Just a second ago, April said. Oh, that's great. Somebody over here? Anybody on this side? A voice that rises above the rest?
My kids, but also my Aunt Sherry.
Your kids? There's got two aunt mentions tonight, right? And Aunt Sherry.
My brother's Malcolm.
Your brother Malcolm. Yes, we love Malcolm. So good. Somebody else over here? Anybody? A voice that you hear that rises above the rest? Jamal? Copy and paste. Yeah, all these. Yeah. Anybody? All right. I know for me, I think this is true for all of us with different people, is my mother growing up was certainly one of those voices for me. I grew up in Verina, east of Richmond, and it really looks the same today as it did when I was growing up, right? It's unchanged. It's just lots of fields and woods and farmland, and we would just disappear into the woods for days at a time. No, it wasn't days at a time. It felt like days at a time. We'd be gone for hours, right? No water bottle, no cell phone, right? It's a miracle that we survived our childhood. But we would be, I don't even know, we would be forever far away. And I could hear my mother's voice. When I grew up, it was Frederick. No, I didn't do Fred until I got to college. That's another story for another time. And so growing, I could hear, Frederick, dinner's ready. You could be building the fort of your life, and you would hear your mother's voice. And we would take off through the forest. We were like the opening scene of The Last of the Mohicans, running through the woods to get home for supper. Playing sports growing up, whether it was on the baseball field in Little League or wrestling in high school, I could hear the gym or the stands could be packed with people screaming, but I could always hear my parents' voice above the rest. My mother's voice, I kid you not, I'm in a wrestling match. Our sophomore year in high school, the JV team we were undefeated. I had an undefeated year that year, and I'm wrestling, right? You're trying to protect your undefeated season, and I kid you not, I can still hear my mother saying it today. Don't bend his neck that way. You're like, are you kidding me? Thanks, Mom. Thanks. Yeah. Sometimes you don't want to hear their voice, or you don't want anyone else to hear what they're saying either. But there are people in our lives, right? We're tuned in to their voice. This is what I want to say to you tonight, that I've got good news for you. That God is supposed to be one of those voices for each of us. God is supposed to be one of those voices for each of us. No matter how much noise that there is, no matter what situation or circumstance, no matter how far away you might feel that you are from Him. His voice is supposed to be one of those voices for you and one of those voices for me. And I believe that 311 Selden Road, that's the address of this property, is supposed to be a place where people learn to feel His presence and to know His voice. I believe that this property has been set aside, ordained by God to be a place where people learn how to discover His presence, to feel His presence, and that in this environment, on these grounds, that people will begin to get dialed into the voice of God in their life. For every person that you named, every aunt, right? Every spouse, every parent, every child, there was a process by which you became familiar with their voice. There was a journey that you went on with that person relationally so that they had your attention. The same thing is supposed to happen with our Creator. He wants you to know His voice. And tonight we're going to be talking about what I believe to be a sacred responsibility that we carry here at 311 Selden Road. Somebody say, get thee up. That phrase comes out of, I was telling Pastor Justin before, when we get new merch, we might have to get some t-shirts that say, get thee up. And Isaiah 40, verse 9. We're gonna dig around in this text and then in Genesis 28 a little bit later, but I want to start here with this verse in Isaiah 40, verse 9. Now, this is a curious verse in the Bible because depending on which translation you pick up, you're going to read something different. This is one of the reasons why when we're drawing conclusions about things that we believe, we'd like to read from different translations because, again, different translations render it different ways. And so here in the New Living Translation, which is predominantly what we use here at City Life Church, it's a good blend between accurate literal translation and everyday language. But as you see here, it says, O Zion, messenger of good news, shout from the mountaintops, shout it louder, O Jerusalem, shout and do not be afraid. Tell the towns of Judah, your God is coming. Now let's go to the next one. I think the next one's going to come up is the NIV, the New International Version. It says, you who bring. Now you see this translation inserts a person. The one we just read, there's not a person, but this one inserts a person. You who bring good news to Zion, go up on a high mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up, do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. Now let's go to the next one. I think it's the English Standard Version. This is one of the most literal translations of the Bible. Like, it's awkward to read sometimes, but it's good for study because, like, what did the Hebrew say in the Old Testament, the Greek, and the New? It said, go up to a high mountain, O Zion, herald of good news, lift up your voice with strength. O Jerusalem, herald of good news, lift it up, fear not. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Now let's look at the last one, the Old Faithful, the King James Version. Love this. O Zion that bringest good tidings, get thee up. That's where our sermon title comes from. Get thee up into the high mountain. O Jerusalem that bringest good tidings, lift up thy voice. With strength lift it up and be not afraid. Say unto the cities of Judah, behold your God. We're going to talk a little bit later about why those differences are there, but regardless of which translation we draw from, the message is clear that God has a plan for places and spaces. In fact, I'm going to keep putting this statement in front of you, and I think I'm going to keep putting it in front of you all year. It's that I believe that there are places that God sets aside. He makes them sacred. He calls holy to be spaces where we are easily awakened to His presence. We can be in God's presence anywhere, right? We believe that as a church. But I do believe that there are certain places that God sets aside for us where we find that it's easier to be awakened to Him there, awakened to His presence, to hear His voice, as if those places actually had a real voice of its own. You understand what I'm saying there? Meaning as if the space itself was saying to you, as if it were alive, as if it had a means of expression to say to you, you can find God here. And I believe that 311 Selden Road is one of these spaces. I believe that when God was putting the world together, that He set aside this soil, these 5 acres, right? This parking lot wasn't here then. This 40,000 square foot facility was not here then, but this earth was here. And I believe that he apportioned it from the beginning of time for this to be a sacred space where people could come to learn what it's like to be in His presence and to know His voice. So if I could just update Isaiah 40, verse 9. Can we do that? Let me just bring it into context for us as a church. 311 Selden Road, that bringeth good tidings. Get thee up into the high mountain, O City Life Church. that bringest good tidings. Lift up thy voice with strength lifted up. Be not afraid. Say unto the cities of the 757, behold your God. Right? I want that to be the legacy of this property. I want that to be the purpose that this soil is here. I believe that God has already set it aside to be as such. And I think what he's asking us to do is to make sure that we carry that legacy forward for generations to come. So part of this sermon is me saying to you, will you carry with me into the rest of this year a get thee up prayer in your heart? Will you, of all the things that you're praying about, the things that you're talking to God about, will you pick up this phrase? Will you adopt this saying for yourself in your prayer life to have a get thee up prayer? I've already started it in my own. And part of this idea of having a get thee up prayer is that you are asking God, what is it that you want me to do here at 311 Selden Road so that this space can continue to be a sacred place? What's the role that I'm supposed to play to build here so that when we're gone, that we're passing something on for generations to come, that this will still be a place where the people of God gather? Will you pick up a get thee up prayer that asks God, is there more that I'm supposed to do? Is there something different that I'm supposed to do? Maybe you've been asking the question, is this the church that I'm supposed to call home? Then what I would say, add to that, is this the church that you're supposed to call home? Because God's asking you to be a part of keeping something moving forward throughout time and history that's going to live beyond your life, that is a legacy of space and place that is holy and sacred. That when we are part of the great cloud of witnesses that the book of Hebrews talks about, when we're a part of that great cloud of witnesses and we're observing God's grand destiny playing out in the world, and we look down and see this place, and you carry in your heart a sense of, I had something to do to ensure that that's still there. When your children, your grandchildren, your grandchildren's grandchildren, other people's children's grandchildren, generations to come, people that we've not even met that are going to show up in this place and in this space and begin to encounter God and begin to learn the voice of their Creator that rises above the noise because you did something with your life, because you gave of your time, because you put forward your effort, because you made a sacrifice to ensure that this space continued to be a holy place. A get thee up prayer. Will you pick it up and carry it with me into your future? All right, let's look at Genesis 28. Oh, I love this story. Genesis 28. See, I don't feel bad about making you wait for food because I've been fasting just like some of you have. And if you've not been fasting, then we really don't care that you want to get down there. In fact, we should have fasting to the front of the line. Can we start that tradition? Yeah, thank you. And if you fasted social media, then you get in the back of the line because that's not food related. That has nothing to do with chili and pie. All right. Oh, it's so good. No, we're not going to do that. Maybe. All right, Genesis 28. Let's start in verse 10. Meanwhile, Jacob left Beersheba and traveled toward Haran. And at sundown, he arrived at a good place to set up camp and stop there for the night. And Jacob found a stone to rest his head against and lay down to sleep. And as he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from the earth up to the heavens. And he saw the angels of God going up and down the stairway. Some of you are familiar with this, right? It's called Jacob's ladder. And at the top of the stairway stood the Lord. And he said, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham and the God of your father Isaac. And the ground that you are lying on belongs to you, right? It's been set apart for a sacred purpose. The ground, the earth, the physical space had a destiny and a purpose. I'm giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth, right? He's not even married, doesn't even have any children. They will spread out in all directions, to the west and the east and the north and the south, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. I'm going to go all the way to verse 19. What's more, I am with you, and I will protect you wherever you go. And one day I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything that I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place. And I wasn't even aware of it. He didn't stop there because he had a map that said, find God here. He didn't stop there because at the last camel watering hole where he rested, someone said to him, hey, you should camp just over there because God speaks to people. He wasn't even aware of it. He did not even know. But he was also afraid and said, what an awesome place this is. It's none other than the house of God, the very gateway to heaven. Stop it. The next morning, Jacob got up very early and he took the stone that he had rested his head against and he set it upright as a memorial pillar. And then he poured olive oil over it and he named that place Bethel, which literally translates the house of God. So good. Let me tell you about Catalyst Church, one of the partner churches that meets here on this property at 311 Selden Road. I pulled this off their website. It says, we exist to disciple and send our members for gospel mission to Newport News and the nations. We believe that every Christian is a disciple of Jesus. And as a disciple of Jesus, we are to follow and grow and to be more like him. Ultimately, a disciple of Jesus is a disciple maker of Jesus. That's good. Disciples don't just grow up in Jesus, they also go out on mission with Jesus. And we are part of Jesus' grand mission to save the world. And we are convinced that a sending church is a multiplying church who will ultimately plant more churches. Catalyst Church meets right here on Sunday morning. Long-term partner with us. This isn't a stopover for them. When they discovered what we were doing here, they wanted to be a part of it. They have a long-term lease. This is their church home for their forever future. But they're not the only church that meets here at 311 Selden Road. There are 5 partner churches, including City Life Church, that meet on this property every weekend. There's Epicenter Church that's in the chapel just over there. There's Anchor Church that meets in here in the afternoon, a Spanish-speaking congregation. And then just recently, they had their first service at the end of December. There was a Burmese congregation from Myanmar that meets in that cafe every Sunday night. Yeah, you can clap for that. Come on. There's not another Burmese congregation until you get, what did he say, to the other side of Richmond? The other side of Richmond. People travel from all throughout the 757 to come here to 311 Selden Road to be a part of that community. The Pastor Zaw, lives in Virginia Beach and commutes. For 5 churches, this is a Bethel space. You with me? For 5 different congregations, this space, this place at 311 Selden Road has been set aside to be a sacred place. So I'm going to put it in front of you again. I believe, and I hope that you will pick up this belief with me, that there are places, just like what we read about in Genesis 28, where it talks about the ground itself is set aside. I believe there are places that God sets aside still today and makes sacred and calls holy, to be spaces where we are easily awakened to his presence, to hear his voice, as if those places actually had a real voice of its own. And I believe that 311 Selden Road is one of these spaces, not just for City Life Church, but for every congregation that gathers here. I get excited on Saturday, and oftentimes we're some of the last people to leave, as I'm driving away out of this parking lot. Almost every Saturday, without fail, I get the smile across my face because I know that these doors are not going to stay shut until next week. I know that tomorrow morning there are going to be people showing up here early to pray. that tomorrow morning there's going to be churches. There are going to be people that are showing up to set up chairs and to put out decorations and to get their music into the projector. That Epicenter is going to be shown. Epicenter and Catalyst Church, they're actually here at the same time, sharing the same space together. Different parts of the building, but occupying this space together. And then that baton just gets passed on to Pastor Oswaldo and Anchor Church. And now that baton's getting passed on to Pastor Zaw with the Burmese congregation, the Myanmar International Church. It's so good. This is a Bethel space for all of our churches. And the same thing that I believed happened to Jacob is supposed to happen to people here. The same thing that happened to Jacob, I believe, is supposed to happen here. Let's jump back into verse 10 and 11. It says, meanwhile, Jacob left Beersheba and he traveled toward Haran. And at sundown, he arrived at a good place to set up camp and stop there for the night. And Jacob found a stone to rest his head again and to lay down to sleep. He was just on his way to some other place, right? He was leaving one place and going to another place. And this wasn't even on his radar that something that he was expecting to happen to him. It's not as though even God himself had said to him, Jacob, on this trip, it's going to be incredible. I'm going to show you something. You're not going to believe it. Oh, it's going to be so good. He was just on his way. It was just an ordinary day of travel for him. Now, the reason why he was traveling, we're going to get to that in a minute, was not ordinary. But when he set out that day, there's nothing in the text that says that he was carrying an expectation that something miraculous and supernatural was going to happen. See, I think every weekend there's an opportunity for Jacobs to come onto this property. And they're just on their way from one place to another. And this is just a stopover for them. Sure, maybe they're attending a church service, but just because someone's attending a church service doesn't mean that they carry some expectation that God is going to encounter them in some supernatural way. In fact, I would say oftentimes I think a lot of people that are visiting church, they're expecting just the opposite because of what their church story is. And it might be that they're coming out of an invitation from a coworker or a friend or a neighbor or a family member, or maybe there's just something inside of them that says, well, maybe we should just visit church again. But on that weekend, church is just another stop in a busy schedule. They're just on their way. And in this year, there's something in my heart that says this year is going to be a year where people that are just on their way to the next thing are going to have a Jacob story. That 311 Selden Road is going to be their Genesis 28 for them. That they're moving from one place to the next place, and this is just a stop for them, and they're going to come out of this just like Jacob did, and their life is going to be changed forever. There was nothing in Jacob's life that indicated that there was an appetite, an expectation, a hunger, a prayer, a hope for anything that involved God. Don't you love that sometimes God does not wait for an invitation? Don't you love that sometimes God does not wait for us to ask? He just comes. 13a. Oh, I love this story. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham and the God of your father Isaac. How many of you know that when you've got praying grandparents and parents, that there's a Genesis 28 moment waiting for you in your future? How many of you know that the relationship that Abraham had with God and that Isaac had with God was setting up something for Jacob, a legacy? Now, Jacob had to choose. Another sermon for another time, another series for another time. It was Jacob's will had to engage what God was doing, but I'm a firm believer in the prayers of parents, the prayers of grandparents, and even beyond. That make ready for us encounters with our God. We've got to choose if we're going to follow him. We've got to choose if we're going to say yes. But I believe that those prayers prepare a future for the generations that are to come. You might say, well, Fred, I didn't have grandparents and parents that were praying for me. And then what I would say to you, then you get to be the starting point. you get to be the Abraham of your family. You get to be the Isaac of your household. You get to be the one. See, it doesn't go back before Abraham, right? Abraham had a father and a grandfather and so forth and so on, but the story picks up with him. Maybe the story is going to pick up with you. That you're going to be the one that's preparing a future for your children and for your children's children and generations beyond, for them to have an encounter with their Creator. Will you give of your life with a bended knee to pray for them, for the Bethels of their tomorrow? All right, let's look at one more with Jacob. Verse 16. It says, then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I wasn't even aware of it. I love that Jacob did nothing to earn this moment. I love that Jacob didn't qualify. He did not apply. He didn't even bring faith to this day. It wasn't as though, right, we see Jesus encounter people, and there's times where he says your faith has made you whole. We believe that, right? We believe that there are times where our faith enables us to engage with God and to receive from him. But I love these other stories in the Bible where nothing is required of us. We bring nothing to the table. In fact, what we could argue is Jacob actually brought everything to the table that a person should not bring to the table if there's going to be an encounter with God. Because the story could have just as easily been that when Jacob laid his head to rest on that pillow of a stone, that a lightning bolt came right out of heaven. Boom! This would have been a great moment for one of these balloons to pop, right? Pop! Oh. I should have had a tack right on my shoe. A note to self for next year, for emphasis, pop balloon. There should have been a lightning bolt. Bears should have came out of nowhere and eaten him. He had done horrible things, conspired with his mother to deceive his father on his deathbed. Who does that? Yeah, Jacob. Robs his brother. He's a liar. He's a deceiver. The reason why he's on this journey to begin with is he is running for his life. And he's running for his life because he deserves everything that he's trying to get away from. Because he's done terrible things. And God says, I choose him. I'm picking this guy. Which means that for each of us, tomorrow morning at Catalyst Church, Epicenter, Anchor, the Myanmar International Church, that there are going to be Jacobs that are rolling up into those houses. Not the saints, not the people that have been there early, praying, serving, giving. The people that from their story, it seems as though what they deserve is the wrath of God, but what's waiting for them is Jacob's ladder. What's waiting for them is a divine presence. What's waiting for them is a voice that maybe they do not yet even know, that one day soon is going to become so familiar to them that it's one of the voices that they recognize above all else, that rises above the noise of the world. He did not even know. Let's go back to Isaiah 40, verse 9. I got to throw something in there tonight for my word nerds. We should start a small group called Word Nerds. Thank you. I heard a few yeses out there. Let's look at the ESV one more time. Go on up to the high mountain, O Zion, herald of good news. Lift up your voice with strength, O Jerusalem, herald of good news. Lift it up. Fear not. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Now let's look at the NIV. NIV says this way, right? This is where it inserts a person. You who bring good news to Zion, go up on a high mountain, You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up. Do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. Now, let me read out of some of these notes here. Now, this is why this verse is such a conundrum for so many Bible commentators. Because in Hebrew, every noun, every adjective, and every verb takes on a grammatical gender. Some of you already checked out and now are doing prop bets for tomorrow's football games. I don't know what that is. I just overheard somebody talking about it. Meaning it changes form to indicate whether it refers to masculine or a feminine subject. Okay? That's Hebrew language. In Hebrew, cities and geographic places are almost always feminine. Almost always. And that's the case here in this verse. So the names of these places are taking on a grammatical feminine gender. So some translations, like the NIV, insert you who, because in their thinking, places can't have a voice, right? So they're reading the Hebrew, and it looks as though someone's talking, and it looks as though God is commanding someone to talk. Right? They're reading the text, and there's this implication. In fact, God is giving said entity something specific to say. It's telling to go up to a place, bringing good news, lift up your voice, right? It's talking about how they're supposed to do it, where they're supposed to do it, and then here at the end, here is your God. That they're given a phrase. So the translator's saying, it has to be that he's talking to a person because places surely don't have a voice. But see, here's the problem. That if you're going to put a you-who in there, sounds a little bit like a Dr. Seuss book, right? If you're going to put a you-who in there, the problem is, if you are going to say that God is speaking broadly to all people who are called to this work of evangelism, here's the problem. In Hebrew, whenever they are speaking of people in general as a group, it's always masculine. If it's referring to Isaiah, he's a dude. So by inserting you who in there, it's not in keeping with how the Hebrew language functions and operates, which is why I think it's not talking about a person. I think God has this verse in the Bible because he wants us to know that there are places and spaces that it is as though they themselves have a voice. I think this is God saying to you and to me, I'm going to set aside certain places on this planet, on this earth, and they are there for a reason. To be a place where people can find my presence and learn to know my voice. And it is as though those spaces themselves are calling to other people, come here and discover something about your God. It is as though the space itself has a draw that God has created to bring people to these spaces, and I believe that 311 Selden Road is one of these spaces. I believe that there are places, I'm going to put it in front of you again, that God sets aside, that he makes sacred, he calls holy, to be spaces where we are easily awakened to his presence, to hear his voice, as if those places actually had a real voice of its own. And I believe 311 Selden Road is one of these spaces. Can I tell you about Channel to Brazil for Christ? They exist to inspire the next generation to overcome their circumstances by offering quality Christian education and training in the heart of the slums of Fortaleza, Brazil. Pastor Marcondes says, our vision is to see children and young people transform from a poverty mentality to success and leadership in all areas of their lives. They have three core values. One is Christian character and leadership, which they define as service, love, sincerity, integrity, and responsibility. The next one is this, an incentive to dreams. Oh, so good. Incentive to dream. which they define as investment, creativity, hope, opportunity, confidence. And the third one is community, which they define as worship and prayer and encouragement and friendship and mentorship. So we were excited to send a mission team to Brazil with Channel to Brazil for Christ last year. It's one of the reasons why we love that they are one of our partner organizations in this building. But it's not just them. There's Shiloh Therapy and Care coming soon. Come on. There's Character Performing Arts, which is led by Celeste Agate. There's Always Learning with Marcy Radecki, helping young children who are learning disabled. And then we can't forget our very own, come on, Kid Life Club preschool and before and after school program with Ashley Moore and her team. Yeah. Can I just tell you, for me, it might not be for you, but it should be. Pop balloon for effect. That these partner organizations are just as important to this city and to this world as the churches that meet here. These are Christ-honoring organizations. And there are people that they're not going to come onto this property to go to a church service because maybe that's not even something they want to do. But what they don't realize, oh, come on, somebody. They pull up into this parking lot early one morning, walking their child down that sidewalk. They're just coming from a place and going somewhere else. And it could be right here on that sidewalk that Jacob's ladder happens for them. That they find his presence, that they hear his voice, because they stepped into a sacred space, because they stepped onto ground that God had set aside from the beginning of time to be holy. That these 5 acres, as soon as they turn into this parking lot, that there is something different here, something different. People that are going to be pulling in with their children, or maybe they themselves, for care and counseling with Shiloh. And they're pulling up into the parking lot because this is a therapist that someone recommended for them. Little did they know that Jacob's ladder could be waiting for them. Maybe they don't deserve it. Maybe there's all kinds of things that are going on in their lives that we would look at them from the outside with a judgmental, critical attitude and think of ourselves that how on earth could God speak to such a person? But God says, no, I choose them. How about a parent waiting in the classroom next to Marcy Radecki as she's helping a child learn how to learn in a way that matches how their brain works? And maybe they're just scrolling on their phone, sifting through Facebook. And then all of a sudden, Jacob's ladder is waiting for them. You understand what I'm saying to you tonight? There is something about this place. There is something about this space. And in 2019, when God miraculously gifted this thing to us, we all celebrated. We all cheered. I'm not sure any of us understood the weight of what God was shifting onto our shoulders. We were excited that he gave us a building. What we didn't realize, that he was giving us a responsibility. That we were supposed to carry something. That we were supposed to build something here. 5 partner churches, 5 partner organizations, all meeting in the same place for the same reason, for the gospel of Jesus Christ. Even if the partner organization is not overtly evangelical, listen to me, the hearts of the people that love Jesus, this is their assignment, which means that God's going to use it to reach people for Christ. And it might even be that the way you use it is just to get them on the property, sitting in their car, walking up on a sidewalk. If we could read this, this is what I love so much about Genesis 28. There is nothing. There wasn't a band there playing some songs for him. Although I love worship and how it awakens me. There was nobody standing over him. Melchizedek didn't show up to pray over him. You understand what I'm saying? There was nothing of the things that we would call sacred, that we cherish. I'm not making fun of them. We cherish them to stir our hearts and awaken us. God calls us to all those practices, but don't make the mistake to think that without those, God can't move. Don't make the mistake to think that without them, God is silent, as if he's limited in the universe until we do something to make it possible for him. Stop it already. He sets aside soil. He sets aside places on this planet that are supposed to be sacred. Let's just do the keys, Madeline. Let's do the keys. You knew that was going to happen, right? Yeah. Revelation 1:10. Oh, I love this verse. Revelation 1:10. It was the Lord's day, which means it was a Sunday morning. That's why it was called the Lord's Day, because the early church gathered on the day that Jesus rose from the dead. It was the Lord's day, and I was worshiping in the Spirit, and suddenly, I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet blast. God wants to fill our lives with suddenly moments. God wants to fill our lives with suddenly moments, just like Jacob, going from one place to the next, having no expectation of anything that was divine, that was forthcoming, and he just wants to show up. See, as much as we want to be in his presence, he longs for us to be in his, and him in ours, because he's a loving father. He wants to be with us. Vanessa and I joke all the time, we're going to be those obnoxious parents when our kids, when they're all married and have kids. We're not always going to call, we're just going to show up. We're going to say it's in the Bible suddenly. We're just here. What? Suddenly, yeah. I might even bring a trumpet. Burp, burp. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Maybe a shofar. Stop it. Thank you, Ken. Thank you. I have a scabbard and everything right on there. Yeah. Oh, it's terrible. God wants to fill your lives with suddenly moments. He wants to fill your lives with suddenly moments. I think this description of a trumpet blast is important. I don't think the idea here is that the intent is that he likes to startle you. I think the idea here is that he wants his voice to be recognizable to you in an undeniable way. Meaning that when the creator of the universe speaks, that you're not walking away not sure. Now, are there times that we wrestle with whether or not that was God? Sure, there's going to be moments like that. I think that's part of the journey too. I think God obscures it sometimes because he's building on us discernment, but there are suddenly moments where he makes it all too clear, where it's undeniable, where we know that we're in the presence of our Father and that we're learning to recognize his voice. I made a decision for Christ, a vow of devotion to Christ, as we call it here at this church, in December of 1990. I was 23 years old, and my life was a lot like Jacob. It was ugly and undeserving of anything except a lightning bolt out of heaven. But my life, like many of you that are watching online, he still said to you and to me, I choose you. I choose you. And it set me on a journey. I began to build inside of me this growing sense of God having an assignment for me, which is why we talk about that so much here at this church, because we want you to have a growing sense that God has an assignment for you, because he does. Because he does. And in the church that my parents were going to, the Mechanicsville Christian Center, which we still have a great relationship with them, the church that I ended up being at for 17 years and on staff for the last 8 before coming here, was the church where I began to be around people who were modeling and demonstrating to me what I'm talking to you about tonight. They had this belief that God was real and that he loved us and that he wanted us to be in his presence, and that we could come to know his voice. I've never heard his audible voice, There are people that do. I like to say I feel his voice. I feel his voice. And I'll never forget, it was that December of 1990. It was soon after that. It was in 91. It might have actually been in 1992. I'm still wrestling with what does God want me to do with my life? I was living at home still, and it was late one night, and I had this sense that I wanted to have a conversation with God, that he wanted to have a conversation with me. So I hopped in my car and I drove into the city. And there's this place in Richmond. I don't know if it's still there. It was the WRVA Tower. If you Google it, you'll see it. And that's the end. It's at the very end of 22nd Street, and it dead ends there. And it's on the top of this hill. And there used to be a bench there in this grassy area. And when you sat there, you could overlook and see the whole entire city of Richmond. And at night, it was glorious. All the lights were lit up. And I remember driving there late one night, and I was sitting on the bench. I found these journals when I journaled a lot when I first became a follower of Christ, and these are from the early 90s, and I found some of the entries of reflecting on that story. And as I was sitting there and praying about what God had next for me, it was one of the first times I really felt like God spoke something to me. And the phrase he gave me was, a well-lit room doesn't need another candle. It just, boom, just dropped right in my heart. It was like a trumpet blast. Not because it startled me, but because I knew this was him asking me to do something, and that set me on my journey. Another story for another time, where I moved in the inner city and then ended up buying a HUD home next to a housing project. And then that's eventually where Vanessa and I met, as she was working for a law firm, and we spent 10 years of our lives in a dark place that needed a candle. I'm sharing that story with you because God wants to have conversations with you just like that. There's going to be times in this year where you feel a prompting in your heart that he wants to talk to you. And what I would say to you is press in and lean into that moment. Whether that means you need to go for a walk, whether that means you need to take a drive. Maybe you'll drive here and sit in this parking lot. Maybe there's another place that you've already found. Like for me, it was the WRVA Tower, where I ended up going back to. That became a place where I would meet with God. You might have a place like that in this region where you just go and it's like you just feel close to him. What I would say to you this year, when you have this prompting that God has something that he wants to say to you, lean into that. Lean into it, because he wants to talk to you. Stand with me. There's going to be some people here at the front, I believe, to be here for prayer at the end of the service. If you have something you want to talk to God about with someone else. So good. Father, find us faithful. With everything that's going on in the world, with everything that's been going on in our lives. Sometimes our priorities, they just get a little discombobulated. They get a little upside down. And I pray that tonight for all of us who call City Life Church home, and some that need to, that 2025 is going to be a pivot year where we put our hand back to the plow, showing up, chipping in, helping out. That something inside of us feels the weight of the responsibility that you have entrusted to us to make sure that there is something built on this property that's going to last for generations. Dare I say, until the return of Christ. Jesus, until you come back, that this will be set aside for a sacred purpose, a holy place. And that one day when we're in that great cloud of witnesses, that we would be able to look down on here, not ashamed because we shrunk back, but with a holy, righteous pride that we leaned in, that we built it up, that we did our part, that we made the sacrifice with our time and our effort and our resources, that we came together with one another to build something in this place for your glory, for your name's sake, for the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ to be proclaimed, for there to be a space that would be forever set aside for Bethel, for Jacob's ladder to happen for people again and again and again and again and again. In Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. Amen.